According to a dictionary definition, propaganda is information, especially of a biased or misleading nature, used to promote or publicize a particular political cause or point of view. In 1941, war broke out between the United States and Japan, and throughout wartime, propaganda was used in order to mobilize the different countries as well as to maintain morale and justify certain endeavors. Propaganda was used in different ways throughout the United States and Japan, and throughout our video, we will be looking into the different forms of propaganda from both of these places, as well as how they are remembered today.
When people in today's society reflect back on how propaganda worked in Japan throughout World War II, the Kokutai no Hangi is crucial to analyze. Beginning in 1937, this 156-page pamphlet was circulated by the Japanese Ministry of Education throughout the educational system. Thus, people today can realize that not only were these ideas promulgated throughout the streets with posters, they were being read and taught to children at very young ages. The document, which has been translated to mean either the national polity or the national essence, is broken down into different sections, and for the sake of discussing propaganda, we will focus on two: loyalty and patriotism, and Bushido. Each section of the pamphlet instilled ideas into the very cores of the Japanese subjects that proved very difficult to deny in a time of war, and thus helped the emperor to gain support from his subjects throughout wartime. In this section, the Japanese subjects of the emperor are told to always put the emperor before themselves. According to a passage in the pamphlet, loyalty means reverence for the emperor and to follow him implicitly. To walk this way of loyalty is the sole way in which we subjects may live. Hence, offering our lives for the sake of the emperor does not mean self-sacrifice, but the casting aside of our little selves to live under his august grace. According to the book Senso, a compilation of letters written to the Japanese newspaper Asahi Shimbun, a man who lived in Tokyo at the time of war recalls, "In Japan, the people were incited by the claim that the oracle of the founder of the empire had pronounced Japan to be a divine land, the crown of the world, with an unbroken line of emperors. Because of its superiority, the Japanese race could participate in these imperial achievements. It caused them to feel that invasion of other countries and annihilation of other races was justified." From reading accounts such as this, people today can infer that the people living in Japan at the time of war went along with the emperor's plans and orders due to the fact that they had been taught of his divinity and of the divinity of their land from a very young age. The concept of the Bushido Code is an aspect of the pamphlet especially important to understand when looking into the effects of propaganda. The Bushido Code, as stated in the pamphlet, is the idea of meeting death with a perfect calmness. Thus, going into the war, the Japanese not only knew that it was a possibility they could die, they accepted it. This belief was especially shown through the popularity of kamikaze attacks.
In this piece of Japanese-made propaganda that was distributed to the Filipino population before the arrival of U.S. forces, the Japanese voice presents itself in a benevolent manner and attempts to gain the favor and support of the Filipino population. This piece contains a cartoon and an accompanying caption. The Japanese voice starts by stating that a degree of unity exists between the Philippines and the Empire of Japan on the basis of them both being Asian countries. As the caption continues, the Japanese voice explains that the United States is putting them in danger intentionally. The cartoon included in the piece clearly shows FDR pushing the leader of the Philippines in between him and a Japanese tank. This piece's intention is to create loyalty to Japan, which, along with the encouragement of honorable victory, was a common goal of Japan's propaganda produced during World War II. In this piece of propaganda, distributed on the front and on mainland Japan, a glorious victory is being depicted. An armored Japanese warrior stands proudly while wielding a blade overhead and sinking enemy Navy ships. Propaganda like this encouraged the war effort on both the front and at home. Courage and honor are both depicted in this scene, and both courage and honor are rooted deep into the Bushido Code, a warrior's code adopted by the fighting forces of Japan.
American propaganda came in all shapes and forms and was meant for citizens of all ages. It ranged from posters to comic books and, for the young generation, cartoons. The purpose of this propaganda was to gain more civilian support of the American military's efforts to defeat the Imperial Army. Here are a couple American cartoon clips that were projected towards the Japanese during World War II.
Nips the Nips is an American propaganda film released in 1944. To begin with, the title Nips the Nips is racist by itself. Nips is actually a racial slur stemming from the word Nipponese, which was the former name for the Japanese. Soldiers in the Pacific War, as well as other people who are anti-Japanese, use this word as well as other racial slurs such as Jap. Throughout this propaganda film, Bugs Bunny represents the views and attitudes towards the Japanese that were supported by the government as well as many citizens in America at the time.
What a beauteous Garden of Eden. A veritable Shangri-La of flagrant beauty. A lustrous poil of the Pacific. So peaceful. So quiet.
The contrast between the peaceful scene when Bugs first arrives versus the loud explosions and fast-paced music when the Japanese begin to bomb the island makes us remember the racist view of the Japanese as violent people. This sudden change sheds Japan in a very negative light, and the scene also furthers a stereotype existing in the 40s that the Japanese are unpredictable and irrational. This is a perfect example of the propaganda that was used to make the people in America feel hate for the Japanese at the time.
What's up, Doc?
The scene brings to mind several racial stereotypes that were held towards the Japanese at the time. To begin with, the Japanese man is shown as angry, violent, and ruthless. He is portrayed as unintelligent when he is fooled by Bugs Bunny. First when Bugs blows him up, and again when Bugs dresses up as a Japanese general, and he immediately gets down on the ground and begins to bow. The Japanese man is depicted as inhuman, a monkey-like figure. He has huge teeth, large round ears, slanted eyes, and yellow skin. He speaks in a fast-paced Japanese like gibberish, which sounds like many random Japanese words strung together, again reflecting the racial stereotype that he is an unintelligent creature operating via instincts versus real human thought. This depiction of Japanese as inhuman, evil creatures was very common at the time. Paul Fussell, who was a soldier in an infantry division during the Pacific War, remembers experiencing this racist phenomenon and describes it in his essay titled "Thank God for the Atom Bomb." Russell says, among Americans it was widely held that the Japanese were really subhuman, like little yellow beasts, and popular imagery depicted them as lice, rats, bats, vipers, dogs, and even monkeys.
Here's some scrap iron for Japan, Moto. Happy landings.
He assaults a sumo, a non-soldier, inferring at the time that not only soldiers but every Japanese civilian deserved to be attacked. It was propaganda used to sway Americans to not only hate the Japanese soldiers, but hate their whole civilization.
This section of the propaganda film begins with Bugs Bunny tricking the Japanese man when he hands him some scrap iron for Japan in the form of an anvil, which kills the Japanese man. This again portrays the stereotype of the Japanese as stupid and foolish, and it also could bring back the historical memory of the economic blockade of the U.S. towards Japan, which deprived the Japanese of much-needed resources such as iron. Bugs then happily paints a Japanese flag on a tree, representing the Japanese man's death, which reflects the racist attitude held by some in America during the war that Japanese lives were disposable and killing them was the goal. This view had lasting effects after the war, as many people held on to their racist attitudes towards the Japanese. This attitude translated into severe brutality by the Americans towards the Japanese during the war. Paul Fussell remembers that, during the Pacific War, it was common to treat surrendering Japanese as handy rifle targets. When Bugs is faced with the large Japanese man, he is shown with the same racially stereotyped features, slanted eyes and huge buck teeth. When he speaks, he sounds almost mentally impaired and is easily tricked by Bugs, making the Japanese seem intellectually inferior.
Yes, hundreds of them. This calls for strategy. I'll have to put on my thinking cap. Hurry, get them while they're cold. Get your ice cream can. Here's yours, Bowlegs. Here, one for you, Monkey Face. Don't shove, there's plenty for all. Here you are, Slant Eyes. Everybody gets one. Ice cream. Well, that's that. Oh, just 1 minute, Joe. Just 1 minute. Oh, you no get away from me. You wait. I got the free one. Believe me, sweetie face, it's a pleasure. Business is booming.
The scene begins when Bugs sees a Japanese ship and is startled and afraid, reinforcing the agenda of the propaganda, which is to make the Japanese appear as a fearsome enemy. Bugs then easily tricks the Japanese with explosive ice cream, reinforcing their stereotype of foolish and gullible. The Japanese swarm Bugs' ice cream truck while yammering away in Japanese-sounding dialects, making them appear like a swarm of insects or rats. In fact, Paul Fussell remembers how there were people in the United States who viewed the war with Japan as a gigantic task of extermination, and that the Japanese constituted a pestilence, and the only appropriate treatment was annihilation. Some of the Marines landing on Iwo Jima had rodent exterminator written on their helmet covers. This sort of use of racist propaganda would have caused some viewers to agree and follow racist views towards the Japanese, which are still remembered today. Bugs even goes as far as to call the Japanese monkey face and slant eyes while handing them explosives, explicitly using brutally racial terms towards the Japanese.
Now, as I was saying, what a beauteous Garden of Eden. So peaceful, so quiet. And if there's one thing I can't stand, it's peace and quiet. I hate it. Get me out of this place. I hate it. Peace and quiet, nuts. A ship. I'm saved. Here I am. Hey, come and get me. Here I am. I'm saved. Hey, a ship. I'm saved. Come and get me. Here I am. Hey.
The flat Bugs Bunny paints represents a soldier he had killed, and as you can see, while painting he is very happy and excited. It should be interpreted from the scene that violence and the killing of Japanese soldiers should be celebrated and deemed as heroic during this time period.
Then an American ship arrives and Bugs exclaims and is very ecstatic, with happy music playing in the background. This represents the view of America, or the West, as the good guys, a righteous figure in the world.
Bugs Bunny claims, "What a beauteous Garden of Eden, so peaceful, so quiet, once all the Imperial soldiers have died." This implies that once American forces kill all Imperial troops and win the war, there will be peace once again and the once beautiful island of Japan will return back to its tranquility. At the time, people were not sure how much longer the war will last, so presenting a time of peace as shown in the scene may have caused Americans to support their troops even more.
I beg my pardon. I bow my stomach at you, very reverent. That's all right. Happy cherry blossoms to you, please.
My
All right, here he coming. Time to shooting now, please, I hope. No, wait, please. Japanese customs say always shooting a man in the back, please. Oh, psycho.
mosquitoes.
The Japanese soldiers sprayed thousands of bullets at only one soldier, Donald Duck. This scene implies that Japan will take all measures and use as many weapons and soldiers it takes to annihilate all Allied soldiers in the war. For Americans at the time, this was a scary message that the Japanese will not stop until all American soldiers are dead.
Throughout World War II, propaganda was used in America to rally the people around the common sentiment of hating Japan and the Japanese people. They accomplished this by demonizing and dehumanizing the Japanese people and spreading these ideas throughout society. The propaganda used in Japan at this time was different in that it focused more on the Japanese people defending their own honor and fighting to the death for their beloved emperor. Looking back at American propaganda, people will now deem the cartoons and other forms used as politically incorrect and overall racist. We want to believe that the American government would be hesitant to allow these shows to be aired uncensored today. The use of racism in American propaganda created and used hatred to build support for the armed conflict in the Pacific. Although many cartoons and other forms of media express blatant racism today, their aims are geared more towards entertainment and less for propaganda needs. Whilst researching the different forms of propaganda, we observed how the Japanese people were more interested in boosting their own pride by reveling in their own accomplishments, whether these accomplishments were real or created to keep morale. While the Americans made racism and dehumanization a main goal of theirs, the Japanese were more focused on their own victory and societal values throughout the war. As we can see by looking back at the effects of the propaganda, the Americans succeeded in making it so many Americans saw Japanese people as being less than human and thus justifying killing them, and the Japanese were able to keep fighting to uphold their honor. Both sides continued fighting to perpetuate their beliefs until the bloody end in 1945.